$500 says you won't spend the night courting that fat Negro girl. The scheming businessman shouts across the bustling auction house as the wealthy cowboy's entourage erupts in cruel laughter. The trembling cleaning woman scrubbing floors has endured years of mockery, destined for servitude until this humiliating wager forces an encounter with the arrogant rancher's son, who sees her as easy entertainment. But beneath her dismissed exterior lies secrets from a privileged past that could shatter his shallow world. While mysterious letters from Charleston threat to upend everything the frontier town believes about worth and power. As the bet unfolds, both their carefully guarded truths risk exposure. His hollow reputation built on family wealth, her hidden education from a world she lost to false accusations. Will this night of forced companionship destroy them both, or reveal that everything their community believes about dignity, love, and value is built on lies? Before we continue, comment where you are tuning in from. Perhaps we will publish a story there. The autumn sun blazed over Dustridge, Texas, as townsfolk gathered around the auction house for the weekly market day. Wooden crates stacked high with goods created makeshift seats for bidders clutching their precious coins. The air buzzed with excitement and the promise of profitable deals. Clementine Beauregard knelt beside a water bucket, scrubbing the auction house steps with worn hands. Her substantial frame drew snickers from passing children who mimicked her movements behind her back. She kept her eyes down, focusing on the stubborn dirt stains that seemed to multiply with each market day. "Look at her go," whispered Mrs. Henderson to her companion. "Poor thing doesn't know her place will always be on those steps." Clementine's jaw tightened, but she continued scrubbing. Years of cruel whispers had taught her that silence served her better than words. The townspeople saw only her size and color, never bothering to notice the intelligence flickering in her dark eyes or the careful way she listened to every conversation around her. A discarded newspaper caught her attention. She glanced around quickly before smoothing it out beside her bucket. The words pulled her in immediately. Political debates from Washington, economic theories from Eastern universities. Her finger traced each line hungrily. Thunder rumbled in the distance, but it wasn't from storm clouds. Horses approached fast, kicking up dust clouds that announced wealth and power long before their riders appeared. The crowd turned toward the sound with eager faces. Jackson Whitmore led the pack on his prized black stallion. His tailored vest and polished boots gleamed in the sunlight. Behind him rode 4 ranch hands, all trying to match his confident swagger. At 25, Jackson commanded attention wherever he went. His father's vast cattle empire guaranteed respect, even from those who privately questioned his character. "Make way for royalty," someone called out sarcastically, though they stepped aside nonetheless. Jackson dismounted with theatrical flair. His friends clustered around him like moths drawn to flame. Their laughter carried across the square as they shared crude jokes and boasted about recent conquests. Clementine gathered her cleaning supplies quickly. Experience had taught her to become invisible when wealthy men arrived looking for entertainment. She ducked toward the auction house back door, hoping to avoid notice. "Well, well," a gravelly voice called out. "Look who's trying to disappear." Ezekiel Morrison stepped from the crowd with a predatory smile. His expensive suit couldn't hide the calculating gleam in his eyes. As the town's most successful businessman, he made his fortune finding opportunities in other people's misfortune. Jackson turned toward the commotion with mild interest. His friends followed his gaze to where Clementine stood frozen by the door. "Got yourself some entertainment today, Jackson?" Morrison's voice carried across the square deliberately. "Though I suppose your tastes run more toward the refined ladies of Dallas." The crowd sensed drama brewing. Conversations died as people pressed closer to hear what would unfold. Jackson shrugged casually. "Not particularly interested in entertainment today, Morrison. Just here for the cattle auction." "Shame," Morrison continued, his smile widening. "I was about to propose an interesting wager. Test whether you're as bold as your reputation suggests." The magic word had been spoken. Jackson's friends perked up immediately. They lived for wagers, contests, and any chance to prove their superiority over common folk. "What kind of wager?" Jackson asked despite himself. Morrison gestured toward Clementine, who had gone completely still beside the door. $500 says you won't spend one full night courting that cleaning woman. Take her to dinner. Show her around town like a proper lady." The crowd erupted in shocked murmurs. Several women gasped audibly. Men elbowed each other and grinned with anticipation. Jackson's friends burst into laughter. "That's easy money right there," one of them called out. "Make it interesting," Morrison added smoothly. "Your black stallion against my 500 if you can't go through with it." Now Jackson hesitated. His stallion was worth more than most people earned in 5 years. But backing down in front of the entire town would damage his reputation permanently. Clementine felt every eye turn toward her. Heat rushed to her cheeks as humiliation crashed over her in waves. She had become a spectacle, a joke, a prop in their cruel game. "What do you say, girl?" Morrison called to her directly. "Interested in spending an evening with Dustridge's finest bachelor? I'll split the winnings with you if he goes through with it." The offer hit Clementine like a physical blow. $50 would cover her rent for 6 months. It would buy decent food and maybe even a new dress. But the price was her dignity, served up for public consumption. Jackson studied her face for the first time. She was larger than most women, certainly, and her worn dress spoke of poverty. But something in her posture suggested strength beneath the obvious vulnerability. "One full night?" Jackson asked, still calculating odds. "Sundown to sunrise," Morrison confirmed. "Treat her like any lady you'd court properly." The crowd held its collective breath. Jackson's friends nudged him encouragingly. His reputation hung in the balance, and everyone knew it. Clementine looked directly at Jackson for the first time. Their eyes met across the square, and something unexpected passed between them. Not attraction exactly, but recognition of shared humanity in a moment designed to strip it away. "I accept," Jackson announced loudly. The crowd cheered and jeered in equal measure. Bets began flying immediately as people wagered on whether Jackson would actually follow through. Clementine nodded once, sealing her fate. The sun hung low as Jackson approached Clementine outside the boarding house where she rented a tiny room. He had changed into his finest evening clothes, though his motives remained purely mercenary. Easy money and bragging rights awaited him at sunrise. Clementine emerged wearing her only decent dress, a faded blue cotton that she had carefully mended and pressed. Her hair was pinned neatly, and she carried herself with unexpected dignity despite the circumstances. "Ready?" Jackson asked, offering his arm with exaggerated courtesy. She accepted it without speaking. They walked toward the town's modest restaurant, while curious onlookers peered from windows and doorways. News of the wager had spread quickly through Dustridge's social circles. The restaurant owner seated them at a corner table, his expression mixing amusement with disapproval. Other diners stared openly, whispering behind their hands about the unlikely pair. Jackson ordered for both of them without consulting Clementine, assuming she would be grateful for whatever he chose. The gesture was calculated to demonstrate his control over the evening's proceedings. "So," he began with a condescending smile, "I suppose this is quite an adventure for you." Clementine studied him carefully before responding. "Adventure suggests voluntary participation in novel experiences. This feels more like mutual exploitation disguised as entertainment." Jackson blinked in surprise. He had expected giggles, gratitude, or nervous silence. Her articulate response caught him completely off guard. "That's an interesting way to put it," he said, recovering his composure. "Though I'd say we're both benefiting from the arrangement. Indeed, you gain social capital among your peers while I gain temporary financial relief. Neither of us emerges with enhanced dignity." The waiter brought their meals, giving Jackson a moment to process her words. She spoke like the educated women he had encountered in Dallas, not like a cleaning woman who scrubbed floors for survival. "You read a lot?" he asked, genuinely curious now. When circumstances permit, Clementine cut her food with precise movements. The auction house discards many interesting newspapers and books. People assume I'm illiterate, so they don't mind my salvaging their refuse. Jackson found himself leaning forward slightly. What kind of books? Philosophy, literature, political theory. Last week I found a volume of Shakespeare's sonnets. The previous owner had excellent taste in marginalia. This was not going according to plan. Jackson had expected a simple evening of patronizing conversation followed by easy victory. Instead, he faced someone who could match his education despite lacking his advantages. "Where did you learn to speak like that?" The question escaped before he could stop it. Clementine's expression grew guarded. "People learn in many ways. Not all education happens in fancy schools. But you didn't learn that vocabulary from discarded newspapers." She set down her fork and met his gaze directly. "You're right. I had different circumstances once." The restaurant noise faded into background as Jackson waited for her to continue. Something in her tone suggested a story worth hearing. "I was governess to the Ashford family in Charleston," she said quietly. 3 children. I taught them literature, mathematics, French, and piano. They treated me almost like family for 5 years. Jackson's assumptions crumbled further. What happened? Mrs. Ashford's jewelry went missing during a dinner party. The obvious suspect was the household help. Clementine's voice remained steady despite the pain flickering in her eyes. "No evidence pointed to me specifically, but I was the most convenient target. They accused you of theft. Worse, they suggested I had been stealing gradually over months. Other wealthy families in Charleston heard the rumors. No one would employ me after that." Jackson felt an unfamiliar sensation in his chest. It might have been empathy, though he had little experience with the emotion. "So you came west." "I had no choice. My savings lasted long enough to reach Texas. Dustridge needed someone willing to do work that others considered beneath them." They ate in contemplative silence. Jackson's mind raced as he reassessed everything about the evening. His friends expected him to return with crude jokes and confirmation of his superiority. Instead, he found himself genuinely interested in her story. "The jewelry," he asked eventually. "Did they ever find it?" Mrs. Ashford's sister discovered it in her own jewelry box 6 months later. She had borrowed it and forgotten. By then I was already gone. The injustice of it struck Jackson forcefully. She had lost everything because of someone else's carelessness and society's prejudices. "Did you try to return? Clear your name?" Clementine shook her head. "Pride is a luxury I cannot afford. Besides, Charleston society had already decided my guilt. Facts rarely change predetermined conclusions." Jackson pushed his plate away, appetite gone. "That's terrible. It's reality. People see what they expect to see. Tonight you expected to find an ignorant woman grateful for your attention. Instead, you found someone who challenges your assumptions." Her words hit their target precisely. Jackson had indeed expected exactly what she described. They left the restaurant as darkness settled over Dustridge. The hotel porch offered privacy while maintaining propriety. They sat in adjacent chairs, watching stars emerge in the clear Texas sky. "Tell me about the children," Jackson said softly. Clementine's face transformed as she described her former charges. Her love for them shone through every word. She had helped them discover literature, encouraged their curiosity, and celebrated their achievements. "Teaching them was the most fulfilling work of my life," she concluded. "I miss them terribly." Hours passed unnoticed as their conversation deepened. Clementine asked about Jackson's ranch, his family, his dreams beyond inherited wealth. Her questions revealed the emptiness beneath his privileged exterior. Dawn approached with startling swiftness. The wager's technical requirements had been fulfilled, but everything had changed for both of them. Jackson looked at the woman beside him and saw not a conquest or a joke, but a remarkable person whose strength had carried her through unimaginable hardship. The realization terrified him more than any physical danger ever could. Morning light found Jackson's friends gathered outside the saloon. eager for details of his conquest. They had spent the night drinking and making crude jokes about what stories he would bring them. "There's our champion," called out Tom Bradley as Jackson approached alone. "Tell us everything. Was she grateful? Did she beg you to stay?" Jackson stopped walking. The expectant faces around him suddenly looked different. Their leering grins seemed grotesque after his night of genuine conversation with Clementine. "It's not what you think," he said quietly. "Come on," pressed another friend. "We saw you two talking on the hotel porch until dawn. You definitely earned that $500. She's not what any of us thought." The group exchanged confused glances. This wasn't the Jackson they knew. Where was his usual swagger and crude humor? "What do you mean?" Tom asked, sensing something had shifted. "She's educated more than any of us. She was a governess in Charleston before coming here." Laughter erupted from the group. "A governess? That cleaning woman? Come on, Jackson. You don't need to make up stories to save face." "I'm not making anything up." Morrison appeared from across the street, drawn by the commotion. His calculating smile suggested he had been watching for this exact moment. "Well, well," Morrison said loudly. "How did our brave cowboy fare with his evening entertainment?" Jackson turned to face him directly. "Pay me the money. I fulfilled your terms." "Did you now?" Morrison's voice carried clearly across the square, drawing attention from early morning shoppers. "Because fulfilling the terms means treating her like a lady you'd actually court, not just sitting on a porch talking." "That's exactly what I did. I treated her with respect." "Respect?" Morrison laughed harshly. "That wasn't the wager, son. The wager was about conquest, not conversation." Jackson's hands clenched into fists. "You said court her properly. I did that." "Nobody courts a cleaning woman properly, boy. We all know what you were supposed to do." The crowd that had gathered murmured agreement. They had expected a different kind of story, one that confirmed their assumptions about social hierarchies and proper behavior. "Then you owe me $500, Jackson said firmly. Morrison's expression hardened. "I don't owe you anything. You chickened out, plain and simple." "I completed the terms exactly as stated." "Prove it. Tell everyone here what happened. If you really courted her, you should have stories worth sharing." Jackson looked around at the expectant faces. These people had been his friends, his social circle, his validation for years. Now they felt like strangers demanding something he couldn't give. "A gentleman doesn't kiss and tell," he said finally. The crowd erupted in jeers and laughter. "Gentlemen," someone called out. "Since when?" Morrison stepped closer, sensing weakness. "You fell for her, didn't you? The mighty Jackson Whitmore got soft over a fat cleaning girl. Don't talk about her that way." The words came out harder than Jackson intended. Silence fell over the group as everyone processed what they had just heard. "Well, I'll be damned," Morrison said with genuine surprise. "You actually did fall for her." Jackson's friends stared at him like he had grown a second head. Tom Bradley shook his head slowly. "Jackson, what the hell happened to you last night?" "I had a conversation with an intelligent woman. Apparently that's a foreign concept around here." "Intelligent woman?" Morrison's laughter turned cruel. "Boy, she played you like a fiddle. Probably read a few books and convinced you she was some kind of scholar. She knows more about literature and philosophy than all of us combined." "Sure she does. And I'm the President of the United States." The crowd's laughter stung Jackson more than he expected. These were the people whose approval he had always craved, whose opinions had shaped his identity for years. "Keep the money," Jackson said to Morrison, "and stay away from her." He turned and walked away, leaving his friends staring after him in confusion and disbelief. Word of the confrontation spread through Dustridge like wildfire. By noon, everyone knew that Jackson Whitmore had defended the cleaning woman's honor and walked away from his own social circle. Clementine heard the news while sweeping the church steps. Mrs. Peterson, the preacher's wife, couldn't wait to share the gossip. "That boy has lost his mind," she declared, "throwing away his reputation over someone like you." Clementine continued sweeping without responding. She had expected Jackson to boast about their evening to his friends. His defense of her honor came as a complete shock. Mark my words, Mrs. Peterson continued. His mother won't stand for this. Martha Whitmore has plans for that boy, and they don't include scandal. That afternoon, Clementine lost her job at the auction house. The owner claimed business was slow, but his nervous demeanor suggested outside pressure. Nothing personal, he mumbled, avoiding her eyes. Just can't afford extra help right now. Clementine walked home carrying her few belongings in a cloth sack. The streets felt different now. People stared more openly, their whispers following her like shadows. Jackson appeared at her boarding house that evening, hat in hand. "I heard about your job," he said simply. "Word travels fast in small towns. I have work at my ranch, correspondence, bookkeeping, things that need someone with your skills." Clementine studied his face carefully. "Your mother won't approve." "My mother doesn't run the ranch business." "Yet," Jackson smiled ruefully. "You're probably right about that, but the offer stands." Before Clementine could respond, a carriage rolled up the street. Martha Whitmore sat inside, her face carved from stone. "Jackson," she called coldly, "get in this carriage immediately." Jackson looked between his mother and Clementine. The choice before him was clear and irreversible. "I'll think about your offer," Clementine said quietly, giving him an escape route. Martha Whitmore's eyes promised consequences that would reshape everything both of them thought they knew about power, family, and the price of choosing love over society's expectations. The Whitmore carriage ride passed in tense silence. Martha sat rigid, her gloved hands gripping her purse like a weapon. Jackson stared out the window, knowing the storm was coming. "Have you lost your mind completely?" Martha's voice cut through the air like a blade. "I defended someone's honor. Since when is that wrong?" "Someone's honor?" Martha's laugh held no warmth. "That woman has no honor to defend. She's a cleaning girl who has somehow bewitched my son." Jackson turned to face his mother fully. "She's educated, intelligent, and dignified despite how this town treats her." "Dignified?" Martha's voice rose dangerously. "Jackson, I have spent 25 years building your reputation. One suitable marriage will secure our family's position among Texas society. I will not watch you throw it away over some delusional infatuation." The carriage pulled up to the Whitmore mansion. Martha climbed out with sharp, angry movements. "Eleanor Fairfax arrives from Dallas next week," she announced. "Her father owns the largest bank between here and San Antonio. You will court her properly." Jackson followed his mother into the house, dread settling in his stomach. "I'm not interested in Eleanor Fairfax." "Your interest is irrelevant. This family requires strategic alliances, not romantic fantasies." Meanwhile, Clementine sat in her tiny room reading by candlelight. A knock interrupted her solitude. Mrs. Chen, the boarding house owner, stood in the doorway holding an envelope. "Strange man left this for you," she said with curiosity. "Fancy paper." Clementine recognized the Charleston law firm's seal immediately. Her hands trembled as she broke it open. The contents made her gasp aloud. Judge Cornelius Fairweather had written personally. He would arrive in Dustridge within the week on urgent legal business concerning her former employer's estate. The letter mentioned significant developments but provided no details. The next morning brought more complications. Jackson appeared at the boarding house despite his mother's obvious disapproval. "I meant what I said about ranch work," he told Clementine. "My offer stands. Your mother will never allow it. My mother doesn't control ranch operations." Clementine considered the practical reality. She needed work desperately, and few people in Dustridge would hire her now. What kind of work exactly? Correspondence with cattle buyers, inventory records, financial calculations. Things that require real education. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Jackson needed her intelligence to manage business he had inherited but never truly learned to run. "All right," she agreed, "but only business. Nothing that gives people more ammunition against either of us." Jackson nodded, though something in his eyes suggested the arrangement might prove more complicated than simple bookkeeping. Morrison watched their conversation from across the street. His initial amusement at Jackson's behavior had transformed into something darker. The situation wasn't unfolding as he had planned. That evening, Morrison began spreading new rumors through the saloon. He suggested Clementine had used feminine wiles to manipulate Jackson, that she was more dangerous than anyone realized. "Mark my words," he told anyone who would listen, "that woman has schemes we can't even imagine." The rumors found fertile ground in Dustridge's social circles. People needed explanations for Jackson's unprecedented behavior that didn't challenge their fundamental beliefs about social order. Meanwhile, Clementine began working at the Whitmore Ranch 3 days a week. She arrived early, completed her tasks efficiently, and left before Jackson's friends might visit. The work revealed the extent of Jackson's educational gaps. His correspondence was barely literate. His financial records were chaotic. His understanding of market forces was superficial at best. "How do you make any profit?" she asked after reviewing his cattle trading records. Jackson's face reddened. "Lucky guessing, mostly." Clementine reorganized his entire system within a week. She identified buyers who had been cheating him, suppliers who overcharged consistently, and market trends he had completely missed. "You could increase profits by 30% with better record-keeping alone," she explained, showing him her calculations. Jackson stared at the neat columns of figures. "I can barely read my own handwriting, and you've turned chaos into science." Their working relationship developed into genuine partnership despite their efforts to maintain distance. Jackson began asking her opinion on business decisions. Clementine found herself invested in the ranch's success. The arrangement couldn't remain secret long in a town like Dustridge. Martha discovered it within days through her network of social contacts. She stormed into the ranch office during one of Clementine's work sessions, fury radiating from every pore. "This ends immediately," she declared. Jackson stood from his desk. "Mother, this is business. This is scandal waiting to happen. Eleanor Fairfax arrives tomorrow, and I will not have her first impression ruined by this improper arrangement." Clementine began gathering her papers silently. She had expected this confrontation eventually. "Don't," Jackson said to her. "We're not finished here." Martha's voice turned icy. "Jackson, choose very carefully. Your inheritance depends on the decisions you make in the next few minutes." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a powder keg. Jackson looked between his mother and Clementine, understanding that this moment would define the rest of his life. Before anyone could respond, hoofbeats approached outside. A distinguished man in a black suit dismounted from a fine horse. Judge Cornelius Fairweather had arrived a day early, carrying legal documents that would shift every power dynamic in the room. "Miss Beauregard," he called through the open door, "I need to speak with you immediately about your inheritance from the Ashford estate." Martha Whitmore's face went pale as the word inheritance registered. Clementine's carefully constructed new life was about to change forever. Judge Fairweather entered the ranch office with solemn dignity. His weathered face carried the authority of decades spent dispensing frontier justice. Martha, Jackson, and Clementine stood frozen as he removed legal documents from his leather satchel. "Miss Beauregard," he began formally, "I bring news from Charleston regarding the Ashford family estate." Clementine's heart hammered against her ribs. She had tried not to think about her former employers since fleeing South Carolina. The yellow fever epidemic that swept through Charleston last spring claimed the entire Ashford family. Judge Fairweather continued gravely. "Mr. and Mrs. Ashford, their 3 children, and 2 elderly relatives all perished within weeks." The words hit Clementine like physical blows. Those children had been her joy, her purpose, her hope for the future. Little Margaret with her love of poetry, Thomas with his endless questions about mathematics, sweet Caroline who had just learned to play piano. Before his death, Mr. Ashford amended his will, the judge continued. "He left his entire estate to quote the most honest and capable person I have ever known, unquote. The will specifically names you, Miss Beauregard." Martha gasped audibly. Jackson's mouth fell open. Clementine swayed slightly, gripping the desk for support. "That's impossible," Martha stammered. "She's a cleaning woman." Judge Fairweather's stern gaze fixed on Martha. She was the governess who educated those children and managed much of the household affairs. Mr. Ashford's final letter expressed deep regret over the circumstances of her departure. He handed Clementine a sealed envelope. "This contains his personal apology and explanation. The missing jewelry incident was resolved months after you left. Mrs. Ashford's sister admitted to borrowing the pieces." Clementine's hands trembled as she accepted the letter. Vindication had come too late to save her reputation, but not too late to restore her dignity. "The estate's value is substantial," Judge Fairweather continued. "The Charleston mansion, cotton plantation, investments in railroad stocks, and various business holdings. Conservative estimates place the total worth at approximately $200,000. Martha's knees buckled slightly. The sum dwarfed the Whitmore family's entire wealth. "200,000, Jackson whispered. Clementine stared at the documents without comprehension. Yesterday she had scrubbed floors for survival. Today she commanded more wealth than most Texas ranchers accumulated in lifetimes. "There are legal procedures to complete," Judge Fairweather explained. "But the inheritance is legitimate and uncontestable. Congratulations, Miss Beauregard. You are now one of the wealthiest women in Texas." Martha recovered her composure with visible effort. Surely there must be other relatives. Distant cousins, perhaps. The Ashfords conducted thorough genealogical research before finalizing the will. Miss Beauregard was their choice, and it was deliberate. Jackson studied Clementine's face, trying to process this dramatic reversal of fortune. The woman he had met through a cruel wager now possessed wealth that made him look like a pauper. "I need time to think," Clementine said quietly. Judge Fairweather nodded respectfully. "Of course. I'll be staying at the hotel for several days to handle the paperwork. Take all the time you need." After he left, oppressive silence filled the ranch office. Martha's calculating mind was already reassessing every assumption she had made about the situation. "Well," she said finally, her tone completely transformed. "This changes everything, doesn't it?" Jackson looked at his mother with new understanding. Martha's objections to Clementine had never been about character or compatibility. They had been about social standing and financial advantage. "Does it?" he asked pointedly. Martha's smile was razor-sharp. "Wealth has a remarkable ability to clarify social situations. Perhaps I was hasty in my earlier judgments." Clementine gathered her things without speaking. The ranch office suddenly felt suffocating. "Where are you going?" Jackson asked. "To process this information somewhere quiet." She left them both standing in the office, each lost in their own thoughts about how dramatically the power dynamics had shifted. News of the inheritance spread through Dustridge within hours. Morrison heard it at the saloon and immediately began calculating new angles. His schemes against a poor cleaning woman were worthless. His schemes against a wealthy heiress required different strategies entirely. Eleanor Fairfax arrived that evening to find the Whitmore household in chaos. Martha had spent hours explaining why the expected courtship might need adjustment based on recent developments. "You want me to compete with a former servant for your son's affections?" Eleanor's voice dripped disdain. "She's no longer a servant," Martha replied diplomatically. "Circumstances have evolved considerably." Meanwhile, Jackson walked the ranch boundaries alone, trying to understand his own feelings. Had he defended Clementine out of genuine affection or misguided pity? Now that she possessed wealth exceeding his own, those motivations mattered more than ever. Clementine spent the evening in her tiny boarding house room, reading Mr. Ashford's final letter by candlelight. His words overflowed with regret and respect. He praised her intelligence, integrity, and devotion to his children. The letter concluded with hope that the inheritance would provide opportunities worthy of her capabilities. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. Morrison appeared at her door with an elaborate bouquet and an oily smile. "Miss Beauregard," he began with exaggerated courtesy. "I feel I owe you an apology for my previous behavior." Clementine studied his face with new understanding. "Your apology corresponds remarkably with news of my changed circumstances." Morrison's smile faltered slightly. "A man can recognize his mistakes and seek to make amends." "Indeed, though I suspect your amends are motivated more by my bank account than my feelings." She closed the door in his face, leaving him standing on the porch with his wilted flowers. That afternoon, Jackson arrived looking uncertain and vulnerable. "I need to ask you something," he said, "and I need an honest answer." Clementine waited, sensing the importance of whatever came next. "Are we friends because you pitied my ignorance, or because you genuinely cared about me as a person?" The question hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they should cross. Clementine looked into Jackson's eyes, seeing the vulnerability he rarely showed anyone. His question deserved complete honesty. "I cared about you despite your ignorance, not because of it," she said simply. "Your willingness to listen and learn mattered more than your lack of formal education." Jackson's shoulders relaxed slightly. "And now, with everything changed, now I need to know the same thing about you. Are your feelings real, or were they born from pity for someone you thought beneath you?" The question struck Jackson like a physical blow. He had asked himself the same thing repeatedly since learning of her inheritance. "I defended you when I thought you had nothing," he said quietly. "I offered you work when no one else would. I chose you over my friend's approval and my mother's threats. Those were noble actions. But nobility and love aren't the same thing." Jackson stepped closer, his voice gaining strength. "Then let me prove it's love." Before Clementine could respond, horses thundered up the street. Morrison approached with two rough-looking men, his earlier obsequious manner replaced by desperation. "Miss Beauregard," Morrison called out loudly, "I need to speak with you about irregularities in your inheritance claim." Judge Fairweather emerged from the hotel, drawn by the commotion. His expression darkened as he recognized the type of legal intimidation he had seen countless times. "What irregularities?" Clementine asked calmly. "Questions about the will's authenticity, concerns about undue influence. These gentlemen represent certain Charleston interests who contest the inheritance." The two men stepped forward with practiced menace. They specialized in legal harassment disguised as legitimate business. "Actually," Judge Fairweather interjected with quiet authority, "I represent Charleston legal interests in this matter. Who exactly are you gentlemen?" The men exchanged nervous glances. They had expected to intimidate a powerless woman, not face down a circuit judge with decades of experience. "We're investigating potential fraud," one of them mumbled unconvincingly. Judge Fairweather's laugh held no humor. "Investigating? With what authority? Under whose jurisdiction?" Morrison realized his hired intimidators were useless against actual legal expertise. His desperate gambit was crumbling publicly. "The inheritance is suspicious," Morrison pressed on. "No family leaves everything to a former servant." "Mr. Morrison," Judge Fairweather's voice carried across the growing crowd, "are you suggesting I would validate fraudulent documents, that I would risk my judicial reputation on false claims?" The accusation hung in the air like gunpowder. Morrison had inadvertently challenged the integrity of one of Texas's most respected judges. "I'm suggesting unusual circumstances deserve scrutiny." "Indeed they do, which is why I conducted extensive scrutiny before traveling here. The Ashford will is legitimate, properly witnessed, and legally binding." Judge Fairweather turned to address the crowd directly. "However, Mr. Morrison's attempts at intimidation and harassment warrant their own investigation." Jackson stepped beside Clementine, making his allegiance clear to everyone watching. Martha observed from across the street, her calculating mind weighing new realities. "Furthermore," Judge Fairweather continued, "I have evidence of Mr. Morrison's illegal business practices. Fraud, intimidation, and corruption of public officials." Morrison's face went pale. His schemes had finally attracted attention from someone with power to stop them. "You can't prove anything," Morrison blustered. Judge Fairweather produced a thick folder from his coat. Bank records, witness statements, and correspondence detailing your criminal activities. Texas justice may be frontier justice, but it's still justice. The crowd murmured with satisfaction. Morrison had exploited people for years without consequence. Seeing him face accountability felt like overdue justice. Miss Beauregard, Judge Fairweather said formally, your inheritance is secure and uncontested. Mr. Morrison will face charges for his harassment and his other crimes. Morrison's hired men slipped away quietly, abandoning their employer to face consequences alone. The crowd began dispersing, their appetite for drama satisfied. Jackson took Clementine's hand publicly, no longer caring about social consequences. Will you marry me? The proposal came without elaborate planning or romantic setting. It emerged from genuine feeling tested by extraordinary circumstances. Clementine studied his face carefully. Are you certain? Your mother, your friends, society will all question your motives now. Let them question. I know my heart. Martha approached with visible effort at humility. Her son's happiness and Clementine's wealth had finally overcome her social prejudices. Miss Beauregard, she said stiffly, I owe you an apology for my earlier behavior. I hope you can forgive a protective mother's misguided concerns. The apology was self-serving, but Clementine recognized Martha's attempt at reconciliation. Holding grudges served no purpose. Forgiven, Mrs. Whitmore. We all make mistakes when we're afraid. Eleanor Fairfax departed for Dallas that evening, her courtship plans thoroughly disrupted. She left with dignity intact but prospects elsewhere. 3 months later, Clementine and Jackson married in Dustridge's small church. The ceremony brought together people who had never shared the same social space before. Clementine's wealth had forced the community to reconsider many assumptions about worth and respectability. Judge Fairweather performed the ceremony with appropriate solemnity. Morrison watched from jail, awaiting trial for his various crimes. With her inheritance, Clementine purchased the auction house where her humiliation had begun. She converted it into a school that welcomed children regardless of their family's social standing or financial circumstances. Jackson proved himself a devoted husband and capable rancher with Clementine's guidance. Their marriage became a genuine partnership built on mutual respect and complementary strengths. The school flourished under Clementine's leadership. She taught literature, mathematics, and critical thinking to children who had never imagined such opportunities. The auction house steps where she had once scrubbed floors now welcomed students eager to learn. Years later, visitors to Dustridge found a thriving community that had learned valuable lessons about judging character over circumstances. The wealthy cowboy and the former cleaning woman had built something lasting from the cruelest of beginnings. Their love story became local legend, told and retold as proof that dignity, intelligence, and genuine affection could triumph over prejudice and social convention.